and welcome to the 2nd of July edition of the Wallop Sessions. I am your host with the most, Austin Russell, and we have another stat show for you today. Another banging game last night for our boys, Three Lions, with a 2-1 win against Congo. I've somehow, ladies and gentlemen, managed to miss the equivalent of a full game of football, but yet I've not missed England score a goal, because this past weekend I was at an amazing bowling pursuit gig back at Lincoln Castle. They were phenomenal. Do not regret going to that gig at any point. I do believe they're still on tour in the UK. If you have the means to go down and see them, I very much recommend it. They're pretty much on tour every year anyway, so don't rush yourself to go see them, because they're basically on tour all the time. A bit like James. I'm always getting messages from my mates that are obsessed with James, saying they're going to like their fourth gig of James in a single year. They're just one of those bands that's always touring. But yeah, I only got the second half of the Panama game because of the Ball Pursuit gig, and I had a right nightmare with the trains yesterday that made me miss the first half, and I've somehow still not missed an England goal. But nevertheless, on with today's show. We have 3 stat movies for you today in the 40-year-old virgin. We've also got the Roy Keane film that dives into his dismissal from the Irish team in 2002 World Cup, and we also have my unexpected banger of the week in Masters of the Universe. This is going to be a great show for us all today, and I cannot wait to get into it. Back to music now with what the audience have been singing all week long, it seems, with Oasis Wonderwall. It is now time to mark this week's homework in the Judd Apatow classic, and one of the reasons I became a filmmaker of any kind, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. I really, really enjoy this movie. For me, it is my ultimate comfort film. The film is just it. I don't know if beautiful is the right word, because it's not one of those, like Oscar baited, like well thought out, like thematic masterpieces. But this film, it understood the assignment of what it was trying to do just perfectly. Steve Carell just completely destroys the show every time he's on screen. And fun fact, that film is actually the reason that the US office was saved from cancellation. So if you love or hate the US office, you can either thank that film or hate that film to as much as you despise, but it is a fantastic film. The dynamic between all the characters is absolutely phenomenal. I loved the fact that even though necessarily, obviously, according to the social norms of things, all the characters outside of Andy, who obviously hadn't lost his virginity yet, quite clearly had like noticeable character flaws to kind of like not necessarily like say um outright, that virginity doesn't solve everything, or losing it doesn't lose everything. I just loved the way that it kind of had these quite noticeable flaws within the ensemble cast. And Paul Rudd is amazing, isn't he? Paul Rudd gives another phenomenal performance, and I would argue his character is probably my favourite in the whole film, just fully based on the performance. He probably commits to the bit probably more than the rest of the cast combined. I mean, Seth Rogen is just Seth Rogen, but he does a phenomenal job. I think his characters have a bit more awkwardness and timidness in this film than a lot of his characters, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I just loved this film so much. The jokes still land to this day on my 30th viewing. The jokes are just so timeless and so real and authentic. I did have quite an interesting experience with this viewing of the 40-Year-Old Virgin, actually, because I started that viewing going, you know what, this film should be, shown in sex ed classes, to show that, losing your virginity isn't the be all end all. Maybe it's a good idea to wait, because I think the film does actually show that narrative quite well. A lot of lesser comedies would just mock the virginity like straight up. and would just shame the character for the whole film. But I feel like the film does a really good job of showing that waiting for the right person is actually a good idea. But then as the film slowly progressed, I was like, yeah, there's a reason why this film is not shown in schools. Like maybe like they should make like a, I don't know, like education friendly cut somewhere. Because I do think the film does actually have some really useful messaging for even today's climate. It's like I said, the jokes have aged incredibly well, but I think the message of the film has actually become more potent with time, especially with these days of like alpha males and dating coaches and things trying to rush, well, anybody into, growing up fast and losing your V plates, as they say, and things like that. I think in today's world of growing up way too fast, I think the movie has more staying power than it maybe did when it first came out. To even a certain extent, I think the first American Pie film is along those avenues as well. Granted, it doesn't like explore those themes as well as the 40-year-old virgin, but I think the American Pie's message of losing, your virginity and stuff rings more true now than it did when it was initially made. And the scenes are beautiful. I mean, the poker scene is iconic. The wax scene is phenomenal. Like, that's a timeless classic for all to be. And I'm sure that those two scenes just get viewed on YouTube alone, and you will get as much entertainment for watching those scenes on YouTube as you would watching the whole film. But do watch the whole film, if not for Paul Rudd and Steve Carell exclusively, um, because they just steal every scene that they're in. Even the introductory scene with Paul Rudd talking about the McDonald tape on the TV screen, and he's like, he's just begging and pleading with like Jay Lynch to go, please do not play this anymore because I'd rather like burn this place to the ground than listen to this again. The speed dating scene is every scene in this film is incredible. I've only got a certain amount of time and two more movies to cover, but this film for me means so much to me. Uh, for the messaging, the performances by everybody involved. Some cast members are skipping my mind, but the guy that plays the guy that's kind of like the lead wingman is also great in the film, and I loved his like insecurities towards the end of the film being explored, because like I said, it kind of shows the audience that being a ladies' man isn't everything. And I think again it does a really good job of combating these pressures that young men are under. And that's why I also said it has the staying power that a lot of these 2000 comedies just don't have. And if you have got I don't want to say like young kids, but if you've got mid teenagers about that are feeling very pressured and they haven't seen it, show them the film, obviously with supervisions, because there are some quite dated material in there. But as I said, I think the messaging runs more true than it ever has. I think it is certainly worth a watch, and I think Judd Apatow made a lot of those comedies in the early 2000s, and I think that 40-Year-Old Virgin is personally his best work, in my opinion, and it is certainly worth a watch. For me, it is an 8 out of 10 comedy and is a must watch, I would say. But I'm pretty sure 90% of the world has already seen it. But if you are in the 10% that have not seen the Steve Carell Judd Apatow classic, I definitely go watch it because the characters are great, the messaging is great. A few dating scenes in there to maybe warn like younger people about if you do decide to watch it, to teach them a few things about societal pressures, but certainly an 8 out of 10 movie for me and a thoroughly enjoyable experience, even though it was like my 40th time watching it, and was actually the first movie I watched when I moved into my university dorms, which is another interesting fact. Music now with Pulp with Babies. Now on to the Roy Keane movie Saipan. I was very hesitant that this movie was going to be any good. To be honest, I was quite surprised they even attempted to put it in cinema because it's a very niche premise, and I was very skeptical that it was gonna recoup any of its money back, but it was actually quite an enjoyable film. I think Steve Coogan as Mick McCarthy is a really, really good casting. Because as you know, he's kind of made a bit of a role with himself with the Alan Partridge stuff of being kind of this man of power, but slightly out of its depth sort of a thing that he's got going on with Alan Partridge. So he is a perfect marriage in this Saipan movie. He's absolutely phenomenal in the role. There's one scene I particularly like, and the main reason why I'm bringing this scene up actually is I was quite hesitant when it first began because I was like, this is just going to be an information dump of the previous scene that we've just seen, so this scene is entirely pointless. But it actually does serve its own purpose of basically showing that these two men have quite competitive solid egos about them. And I was like, okay, film, this is not just another information dump of stuff we've already seen. To be fair, my first criticism of this film is that information is not displayed very well at the beginning of the film. I never thought I would notice this about a film, but you know, like the production company logo animations that kick off the film that happened during every film ever made. Well, this was a particular case for me because there were that many logos involved that it was actually becoming quite distracting from the information that was being said. Because I think what they were trying to go for is they were trying to hook the viewer in by only being able to hear the news that Roy Keane has left the Irish camp, and they were trying to use, real life radio, real life reports, and that kind of thing. But as I said, it didn't really work for me personally because there were just too many production logos, and I know that that's probably not their fault that that was the case. Because obviously the people that worked on the film are the people that worked on the film. They can't really help the fact that they got so many studios involved in this film. And by the way, there are too many studios getting involved in these films anyway. They'll like get a studio logo for like doing, I don't know, like 2 seconds of like work you'll find, which is fair enough because obviously it's a company that worked on the film. But a lot of the time I'm thinking, do they really need this many people to make like a film of this level? And as I said, it's not just something that happens in the beginning either. The whole film does these sorts of things like well, not the whole film, but like 2 or 3 scenes do this thing of overplaying music over really important information in the film, to the point where they're going over like the Saipan War and stuff like that about like the atomic bomb. Quite heavy stuff is being explained and told to the audience here. And the music you hear is like some 80s dance pop. I can't remember the song off the top of my head, but it's like "Let's Get Physical" being played over this really horrific war information. It's like something like that. It's not "Let's Get Physical," but it's like a similar ilk of film, of the song that's being played. And I'm like, this music choice is just wildly, wildly out of place. Who thought this was a good idea to put this music over the film? And as I said, this happens 3 or 4 times throughout the film, uh, where important information is just drowned out by gopping music choices, and it's very, very bizarre. Very, very, very bizarre. One thing I will say to bring back to the positives, because I like to be a balanced reviewer on this show, is there are certain scenes that are shot incredibly well. There's a scene in the film that I particularly loved, where the Irish team begin partying, and it's done sort of this long shot, sort of like green hued uh, corridor of the Irish team going down this corridor. And I think it's shot really well because I think it really, really does intensify that Roy Keane is the only person not taking part in any of these actions. And it's kind of like, I don't know whether this is what they intended, but I thought that the narrow hallway was also like a really good way of explaining it for like visual reasons, because it's quite a narrow hallway and obviously time is closing in on them to get ready for this World Cup. So I thought that the narrow hallway, along with the parties happening quite slowly as well, because it's filmed in slow motion, so it makes it more impactful as well. The sheer amount of people coming down this hallway, and it's really well made and really well enjoyable. And also there's some really, really cool uses of fisheye lens in this film. Like there'll be shots of that are like really of Roy Keane being very intense. I think he's played by Einar Hawkcliffe. I think I pronounced that name wrong. I probably butchered it. Where Roy Keane's being quite intense, and it's kind of getting the best of him. How inept the Irish team seems to be doing in organising this World Cup. Did you know they didn't even have balls ready? That's kind of like a bare requirement, isn't it, to have balls at the World Cup training? But because of the use of the fisheye lens through like the keyhole in his hotel room, it really makes his rage and really makes his like anger towards his team, it makes it feel very, very personal and very deliberate. Like that he's trying to hold his anger in. And it's like I said, the fisheye lens adds a level of intimacy and violation to the shot that almost visually really well shows his contempt slowly boiling over. And they do that two or three times in the film to the point where it's it's very, very good and it has very clear theming and very clear structure. Because a lot of the time in films like this, they'll use cool shots for the sake of cool shots. And one thing I liked about this film is the cool shots were used in a structural way. So for example, all of Roy Keane's anger scenes in his hotel room were, or at least going into the hotel, were shot the exact same way. All the hallway scenes were shot the exact same way to kind of show some actual like shooting structure. I kind of liked the way every time that a hallway is used, the characters are kind of skewed to one side to show like the emptiness of the hallway. For me, it visually really added to the awkwardness that was taking place of these three people in kind of like this awkward room. And I think seeing, I'm sure they probably intended this, but I'm not entirely sure. Seeing like the empty space where like Roy Keane could go to like get away from his teammates, but he wasn't taking it, and still being able to show kind of a confined space between him and his coaches and teammates in these hallway scenes whilst using this vast long hallway was very impressive, and I really enjoyed watching this film. There are two, particularly for me, terrific scenes that really standed out that I wanted to talk about. Where Roy Keane goes up to the breakfast table to sit next to Mick McCarthy, and he's like, I'm doing this to show unity towards the boys and to show them that we are united and this is a united front. And there's a great part of the scene, and that where this is one of my favourite parts in the whole film, when he tries to talk to Roy Keane, when he's sat next to him, and he goes, "We don't have to talk. We just need to eat. Well, I'm just here to show unity. I'm not here to talk to you. I couldn't care less about that about talking to you." I thought that scene shows their tension and Roy Keane's resentment so well, and it's so well done. I think I know I've said this before, where it kind of feels like biopics or things like that are kind of aided by how good the performing person of the famous people are over the fact that it is a good film. But one thing I really liked about this, well, I guess biopic, or I guess it would be more of a historical film because it's over a bit of time. I liked the fact that it didn't over-explore Roy Keane's upbringing. You're shown scenes of him playing football in his garden pretty early on, but I loved the fact that the film is strictly structured around those days up to Roy Keane leaving the national team. Because a lot of these films would over embellish it and spend too much time in parts of his life that weren't relevant, and I feel like it does a really good job of dodging those hurdles and kind of just focusing on what people came to see the film for. And it's phenomenal, really, in how it just sticks to its structure, where it almost feels a bit like a documentary sometimes, literally, in how the authentic the whole movie feels. There's this great decision. I don't know whether this is based on footage actually taken by the Irish players at the time, but to have some of the players have like a Sony Handycam, and I think that shows a really really good disconnect between Roy Keane and the other players, in the sense that, these players are trying to capture the moment and enjoy their first time at a World Cup, where Roy Keane's just trying to go, I want to win a game, I don't know why you guys are doing this. And it's such a good visual representation of where the two parties are at, where these people are, as I said, they're basically being tourists. They're walking around with a video camera, vibing, going on banana boats. And the fact that this is all captured on a Sony Handycam, or the equivalent at the time to a Sony Handycam, really sells that narrative really well of the differences between these two people's attitudes. Yeah, it's a really, really good film. And I want to end on a last criticism, and I don't really want to class it as a criticism because it was something they actually fixed later in the film, where the opening shots of Roy Keane at the gym do feel a bit too student film for my liking. Like the harsh lighting and him being stood on his own, just like using the rowing machine and stuff like that. It looked more like a Nike ad or a student film more than an actual film. But one of the things why I've left that till the end is it was something they actually fixed when they get to Saipan, where obviously he's out in the gym, kind of working out with the other teammates, and they do actually fix that visual issue, in my opinion. But it is a really, really solid film, and I do think you'll get a really good time out of it. Obviously, it was obviously made for dirt cheap, and you can tell, but they really did stretch that budget about as well as they could have done, and you've got to admire the amount of effort they put in to making that film. And I recommend you go watch it. It's on Amazon Prime right now, and if you want to bask in the glory of the unity of the England team, and I don't know, laugh at another teams or rivals' incompetence, it is certainly a great watch. Music now with Arm's Length by Sam Fender. Now it is time for my review for my unexpected surprise of the year. I was very, very hesitant about how this film would be good, but it absolutely blew me away in Amazon's Masters of the Universe, the reboot of the He-Man franchise. I was expecting this to be to kind of lean too far into that 80s nostalgia and not really get the tone right for modern audiences. That's what I was expecting, and obviously there were some controversial casting decisions made in that film with not dramatic, I'd say who it was because I don't want to get done for defamation, but I'm sure if you paid attention to the casting choices of Masters of the Universe, there were certainly some that were scrutinised for reasons beyond filmmaking. Let's just say the least. He did a really good job as well, which was unfortunate. Well, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but yeah, it was quite awkward. But this film was fantastic from start to finish. As I said, it completely blew my expectations away. The way the film kind of introduces He-Man is kind of really good, but also very generic as well. It dives into sort of him being sort of the weakling of the group. You know, he's getting battered by all these fellow students that he's studying, and obviously he's not getting on very well. Everyone's teasing him for being weak and all that sort of stuff. You know, basic opening of a superhero movie stuff. It's done to a reasonably good degree. I liked Idris Elba in this film. Why they keep insisting that he does an American accent when he can't do one is beyond me. But other than that, his performance is pretty much great. My one big problem with the opening of the film, uh, outside of it being completely, you know, generic superhero weakling stuff that goes on in every superhero origin story, especially of years gone by, is I didn't like the way that his father was in this film. Because it basically took me completely out of the film at certain points. Because obviously, Idris Elba and the King have this really good chat about him not being the strength he wants his son to be, and that he's tired of his son being weak and you're not training my son correctly. And I was like, yeah, fair enough, that's standard behaviour. But where the movie loses me in that respect is when the actual, you know, invasion of Skeletor takes place. And the king just does nothing but run away for the entire sequence of the film, other than the end when he's basically got nowhere else to go. He's just running behind Idris Elba for about 10 minutes of the film. I'm like, right, so you're just a complete hypocrite then. And obviously, I was expecting like the king to die and stuff at the beginning, because that's what all these films do. They kill off somebody you've spent barely any time with on screen, and that's it. That's the tragic story done with. But it got to a point where I was actually wanting him to die and fail, because his behavior in the following scene is just he's just completely what's the word, like, irredeemable, considering he's just berated his son for being an absolute weakling, and then he spends the whole invasion running away from people. And I was like I said, he may confront Skeletor at the end of this sequence, but that's because he's got nowhere else to go. And even then, he's like doesn't try and fight him at all. He just sends his kids to like run to this portal, which obviously sends He-Man to Earth. And I was just like, right, so this character's completely unlikable, and he's supposed to be like the reason that He-Man goes home, and I don't want him to go home because I don't like the dad. But yeah, it was a solid opening. Outside of that, I loved the way that Idris Elba's character worked in that film. I think I liked how heroic Idris Elba actually portrayed himself, and the camera shots during his big fight in the opening scene were absolutely phenomenal. And the CGI outside of the battle cat maybe is phenomenal in this film. There's a really good review, I think, of Supergirl, which is the film I'm diving into next week. But I'll give you a little bit of a tidbit of that review. Is if the movie suffers because your CGI isn't good enough in terms of like, does it sacrifice like vibrancy in the color grading? Does the movie look dark and muddy and boring to look at because of your CGI? You need to rewrite the script. And that's a fantastic point that I saw. I think it was in the Telegraph or something about Supergirl. But this movie still has a very bright, vibrant color scheme despite the CGI, because the CGI is actually good. The aliens look great. I don't know how much of Skeletor was CGI, but Skeletor looks phenomenal throughout the whole film. He's performed actually expertly. Probably Morris's favourite best performance there with Jared Leto. I'm not entirely sure how much of his controversies are true, but he did actually a phenomenal job, which I was quite surprised with, because he does an awful job in both Morbius and not Craven the Hunter, Tron Ares. He's quite clearly the worst part of that film. Tron Ares is basically what happens if you give like a experienced director a first time script. That's the best way I could sum that film up. But that's the first time I've seen him in a film uh, since Tron Ares, and it's probably the best performance I've seen him in. And he's just so magnetic on screen. His performance gets that perfect tone of sort of intimidating villain, but he's a bit campy as well. It's a bit like I spent the whole time watching Skeletor thinking, oh, you know what, Willem Dafoe would do a fantastic job here. And that's kind of what he does. He does a Willem Dafoe Green Goblin performance, but kind of like a lighter version of that, in sort of like a more of a kid friendly way. I know that the Green Goblin isn't the most aggressive, dark person out there when the film released originally. But yeah, it's a phenomenal performance by Jared Leto. He's probably the best actor in the whole film, actually. Uh, the guy that plays He-Man does a phenomenal performance as well. And the whole movie kind of takes me back to sort of those early 2000s superhero films where the superhero is kind of a bit awkward. He's not quippy. He's not sort of like suave and smooth with the ladies. I loved He-Man's awkwardness throughout the film because it took me straight back to those Sam Raimi Spider-Man films that I loved so much. And the movie makes so many cool little creative touches that I really enjoyed. Like I love the fact that when he returns home, he keeps the drawings of all the superheroes that he grew up with. And there's this great scene actually where he's asked to do homework as like a little kid, for to draw a historical figure. So rightly so, him being a little kid and new to like planet Earth, he draws his dad thinking everyone's gonna know who he is because he's like the king of Eternia. So that's obviously a historical figure to him, but obviously to the teachers and stuff, it's complete gibberish. It's complete nonsense. I thought just those, and also despite that traumatic, or well, I don't know if it was traumatic, but despite that history of bullying for those drawings, he's kept those drawings, he's kept those things alive. Whereas I think a lot of lesser films would have, how do you say, they would have suppressed it for like the most of the film. And then he would have had a eureka moment. Oh my god, I'm from here. A realization of who he actually was. But I loved seeing sort of an interpretation of it where this guy knows who he is almost to a fault throughout the entire film, and it's very gripping and very endearing the entire time. The scene where he's like explaining his upbringing and his actual childhood to a date when he's on a date is expertly done and feels again like it was lifted straight out of a Sam Raimi Spider-Man script. And it was just I loved also the addition of Boys Don't Cry by the Cure as well, but like the piano version of it. So it's like he's just reading those things. Obviously, he's looking at the drawings, holding back those emotions, and it's really really powerful stuff. And I loved the way they kind of went to the original recording when he goes back into the real world and he goes back into like his job and things. I loved everything about the movie, especially in the real world. I thought the real world stuff again has that early 2000s Spider-Man vibe. Guy down on his luck in a dead end job who gets these phenomenal powers out of nowhere. But he doesn't just get these powers, he's looking for those powers. And there's a great scene I think where when he's trying to get to work, but he like obviously his car stalls and things. I love those little touches like that and scenes like that because it makes He-Man seem very human. It makes Adam seem like a normal, regular guy. And I think in today's age of the Avengers and all these massive spectacles, even though He-Man is, it's still very much that grounded, human vintage superhero film that's just about one superhero. And it's a great watch from basically start to finish. All the performances are great. There's not really a standout bad one, I would say, that happens in the film. I would say that the Battle Cat voice is slightly grating. It's kind of like, you know, when you watch Japanese anime and they try and pick somebody to have like a cute, marketable voice to dub over the Japanese voice acting that's obviously quite good. It had that we've dubbed over this with an overly acted voice actor for the English version. That's kind of how I could sum up that performance. The King doesn't really have much to do, as I said. Skeletor's character arc through the whole thing. There's actually a beautiful scene with him and Alison Brie, the woman who plays the witch, where he's like king, but he wants the sword for the power because he's scared that if he doesn't have the sword, it will all go away. And that just felt so human and so real. That scene is such a beautifully simplistic scene that again, it's a superhero movie that's gone back to the human element, and that's probably the best part about this film. Again, it's a superhero film that's gone back to the human element. And it's another great example of what you do when you simplify a film script and focus on the characters involved in the script. I loved the scene when they go back through He-Man's past and Skeletor's in all these costumes and things kind of taunting him. It kind of takes me back to those PS4 PlayStation story games where you're kind of taken through the whole movie again through like a through like a how do you say, like a sinful, like regretful way, like, oh, your life was pointless and worthless, look at this dead end job and something, and stuff like that. And the costumes that Skeletor's in during these scenes is, it just makes the whole scene so enjoyable to actually watch. Like when they go back to the gym, he's in gym clothes. When they go to the office, he dresses up as He-Man's least favorite person in the office. It's little touches like that. Again, it goes back to that human element of the film that's not in a lot of superhero films these days. I just loved every second of this film. It was fantastic. And it's a shame that it's not done particularly well at the box office, but I have heard that they're working on a second Masters of the Universe film. Hopefully, when it goes out on Prime, because it's an Amazon film, they can get a few more ratings, a few more viewings, and it can be like number one on Prime for like 5 weeks and go, right, so it didn't do particularly well at the cinema, but if we can get 100 mil and it's the highest viewed movie on Prime for the next 2 months, it's still worth making another one. But one thing I will touch on last, I think, with the He-Man film is one thing. There were two things I really liked. I really liked that Skeletor seemed like a character that would actually be able to lead an army, that would actually be able to convince people to join his side. His charisma and the way he's performed throughout the whole film, and even his dialogue, and I said, he's so charismatic and so likable in the film that you could see people going to Skeletor's side to be under his rule. You could see people wanting to be a part of his kingdom instead of the Guardians of Eternia's. You could see a world where somebody goes to that side of the war. And that's, again, that's what a lot of films these days just don't do. You know, people join these leaders out of fear that they're going to be like killed or arrested or put in prison or things like that. But the fact that Skeletor is actually a likable, charismatic leader where you can feel people would actually want to join him makes the film really stand out to me. Obviously, I've not seen the original Masters of the Universe, so for people that probably have, I'm probably regurgitating a lot of information they already know. And it was just very, very, very enjoyable to actually watch Skeletor to the point where, yeah, this guy is a believable leader. This guy could lead an army. And again, it's not something I've seen in these films before. I also liked what they did with Idris Elba's character. As I said, apart from the American accent, he cannot do an American accent, people. where obviously they didn't do the old adage of chucking somebody in for 10 minutes and then they die and then it's all tragic and stuff. I like the fact that he stayed in the film and had a nice character arc throughout the film. Again, that's something that you don't very often see in big blockbusters like this, where they kind of, kill this person off that you barely know to get some quick sympathy in the film. I loved the fact that he was kept in for the whole film and went on his own journey and went on his own arc. And it didn't ruin the pacing of the film at all either, with him being like a uh down on his luck person. The arc doesn't feel out of place. I feel with a lot of these ensemble films, there's always one arc that feels like it could have been put in the next film or shouldn't be in this film at all. This arc fits very well into the actual film itself and the structure of the film. And also, I liked the fact that, the love interest of He-Man doesn't get with He-Man at the end. Like, again, you would see very often, like, a kiss and then credits roll, and you don't get any of that either. The film is very unique in its simplicity, and there are still a few screenings available for you to go watch it at this current time, and I strongly recommend you do. For me, at this current time, it is the best blockbuster of the year so far, to the point where it's not even close. Like, this is the best blockbuster I've seen all year. It's not the best movie of the year, but in terms of big blockbusters that can appeal to everybody, I think it stands head and shoulders above every other blockbuster I've seen this year. At least maybe until the Odyssey and Spider-Man Brand New Day come out. But this is a movie certainly worth your time. If you're a Prime member, certainly go watch it day one, because I want another one. I want movies like this that don't have like multiverse stuff and they're not trying to set up like loads of franchises and stuff. This was a lovely callback to how superhero films used to be. And it's like I said, if you are a fan of Sam Raimi and those Spider-Man trilogies, which I know a lot of people are because they are still the best Spider-Man films, you will have an absolute blast watching this film. And one thing I will say is I just wanted more of He-Man in the human world. I wanted more of it. For me, there's probably a bit too much time in Eternia. I wanted more time in the human world. I wanted more time of him maybe saving somebody in the human world, like kind of like the way that the Superman 2025 balances it out with the different worlds and stuff. But I just really really enjoyed this movie, and I think it said something that with all the superhero stuff with He-Man, I wanted more Adam. That's what I wanted, and I think that's the best part about this film is I wanted more Adam. I wanted more of him in the real world, going on more dates and stuff. And I loved the scene when he's like screaming and screaming and screaming. See, I proved. See, I told you it was all good. And the scene when he tried to take the sword from the comic book shop is just straight, feels so realistic and authentic. The whole movie is just incredibly authentic and is like a vintage wine built to screen, and it's absolute blast. You will have forever and a day amount of fun with this film. Go watch it while it's still in cinema. There's a few screenings left, and if you've got Prime, please go watch it. You will have the time of your life watching a callback to classic superhero films. Wow, that review was almost about to end 5 minutes ago, but I'm still rambling on. Anyway, back to the music now with You Somebody by Kings of Leon. Now it is time to give you this week's homework. I was looking at the movie release calendar for what's coming up in the next couple of weeks, and one thing that caught my eye was the Moana remake is coming out July 10th. So to get you lovely listeners ready for the week that is ahead, I would like you to watch the critically acclaimed animated version of the Disney film of the same name. I've heard very good things about Moana. I've never seen it myself. I'm looking forward to finally sitting down and watching it myself. As a big rock fan, personally, I think it's going to be pretty fun of a watch. But I'm always a bit hesitant about watching like kids animated films because I'm always a bit like, is it really going to be for me? Am I going to grade it fairly? So I'm never really particularly sure about whether it is a good idea or not to sit down and watch something that's clearly not meant for me. I feel the same thing about watching uh, kids' movies in the cinema. I always feel like parents are going to look at me a bit weird turning up to Minions on my own. Like, why is this 25-year-old man in Minions by himself? Listen, I'm going to have to at some point because I'm on top of movies recently. I'm running out of movies to see, so it's coming. But anyway, back to music now before we wrap up today's show with Naive by the Kooks. And with that, it is time to say goodbye to you, lovely people. Next week on today's show, we will be watching some bangers, or you'll be listening to my opinions after watching bangers in Toy Story 5, Supergirl, and Mandalorian and Grogu, which was supposed to be last week's show, but due to transporting errors due to trains yesterday, was not possible. I cannot wait for another great show. These are the most blockbusters we're probably going to ever have in a row on this show, and obviously the first appearance of Pedro Pascal, which I'm sure will not be the last. Pretty sure I said that last week. But anyway, I'm going to leave you now with the hope that this World Cup might be the one. Here is This Is the One by the Stone Roses.